Can you hear me talking now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I can't hear Tim. Tim, can you say something?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you.
You can hear me, I can't hear you. Okay, I can't leave it muted, Theo. We might need to... You can, but I can't hear you. Theo, quick, get in here. If I mute it, I can't hear Tim.
Unmute your computer. Here we are.
But then I hear the Ustream. You've got to mute the Ustream.
You can mute the Ustream here, remember?
Oh,
there we go.
right.
Let's all put it in the phone. We are live. And
hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first Rowing Chat. We're really pleased to have as our very first guest today, Tim McLaren. I was fortunate enough to meet Tim many years ago when he was a guest coach at Cambridge University. He used to come over to be finishing coach for the boat race. And at the time we were living in Putney and had the opportunity to chat with him on a few occasions when he wasn't coaching. So, Tim, who are you and what do you do?
Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. This is Rebecca's brainwave, so I hope it answers a few of your questions. My background, I've been involved with Cambridge for 13, 14 years, back in the 90s predominantly, and 2000s. But at the moment I'm coaching at the New South Wales Institute of Sport. My last 4 years was with the US, and I ran the men's program there. And before that, in Australia, predominantly as a club coach over the years, worked for 13 years as a volunteer coach in 3 different sports, rugby league, surf, rowing where I grew up, and also rowing, of course. So I've done a number of Olympics, 7 all up, 1 as an athlete, 6 as a coach, and I've coached quads at the Olympics, double scull, the light double, the 4 and the 8. And, you know, I've always been interested in education and usually do these things, you know, for free. But, so modern technology in the world. So hopefully we can answer a few of your questions this morning. And, you know, we're happy to follow up afterwards if there's any resources we can provide you or you need. So I'll turn it over to you, Rebecca.
That's really generous, Tim. Thank you ever so much. One of the things that Row Perfect wants to do is to provide a conduit for coaches who want to learn more, to get information and to have their specific questions answered. So in preparation for this, we asked our readers of the Row Perfect news blog what they would like to ask you. And the first question that we're going to throw out to you today is, how do you convince clubs and coaches of the need to improve their standard of coaching?
You know, I suppose if you've got good athletes and you're going well, it doesn't really, you know, register that you need to improve that. However, it's sort of an ongoing thing that if you want to convince people something, you have to have a fairly compelling vision, a compelling argument. So convincing clubs and coaches of the need, you know, that has to come from the top. And, you know, good coaches and good administration, they have the ability to do that. I think all clubs should encourage good models and good practices for coaching. So, you know, you can get guest coaches in. You need good video system in your club, which is accessible there readily at the end of practice. And you can have, you know, access to education programs, not only level 1s and 2s, but there's a lot more information online these days. And normally, you know, if you've got a good support system, club captain or members of the committee who are supporting the coaches, you know, they can drive this thing a little more. Coaches are generally pretty busy, you know, they're running in and out. A lot of coaches, particularly at clubs, have proper jobs and they don't usually have the time. But convincing people needs a little bit of a support mechanism and a club direction that coaches is important. So that would be all, I think. They're the main things. Make education available, make a compelling message to people on the importance of coaching, and then provide resources to make that happen.
So from the point of view of the club coach who he or she is really keen to learn more, but maybe perceives that there isn't the same sense of desire or urgency from the committee at the club, do you have any specific recommendations as to what they could do to demonstrate that benefit to other coaches, so that perhaps as a group they could go to the committee and ask for help?
Well, if you're at loggerheads with the committee, I mean, okay, you want to stay at the club. So if you're diverging, opinions on this sort of topic, well, you can actually, make inquiries yourself. People call and write to me and come out in the speedboat to watch practices and listen or chat. And there are a number of avenues to do that, but people are usually contactable, and I think good coaches are quite happy to help coaches who are learning. So sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands if you want to improve that education side, that knowledge side of your coaching in a practical way.
We just got a question come through from John Hill. The crew, the coach, or the committee, or the coach, he says, who decides if the coach is doing the job well enough? That's a very interesting question, John.
It's a good question. I think coaches have a knowledge about what sort of job they do, but I think they're going to get the message from the board or the governing committee of your club, and it's usually through results. It's usually through people happy with the culture that you're establishing. Are people having fun? Is there a good mood? Is there a good atmosphere at the club? Are you organised? Are you proficient at what you're doing? Is there good feedback from athletes and supporters and parents? Depending on your demographic of who you're coaching. So I think it's a multifaceted way of feedback, and coaches sort of get all that. Sometimes I walk into boathouses and I can see, they're disorganised. The place is, very messy, and you sense things that could be improved straight away.
Tim, I think one of the things that perhaps some of our listeners will be able to tell us is I perceive that many rowing clubs do not actually have a club strategy. They don't have a plan that says, here's who we are, here's why we're here, here's what we're going to do for our members. And without a clear guide as to where the club is aspiring to be, whether that is to be the dominant junior club for your town or to provide a wide range of recreational rowing facilities for local people, I think without that, it's very hard for a coach to judge his or her effectiveness.
No, that's absolutely true. It comes back to leadership again, and someone taking charge and having a compelling vision for the club. It doesn't have to be anything outrageous, for people to have fun, to create a good culture, to be represented at regattas, to enjoy the club's social functions and so on. I went to a club just recently, and just to give them some advice, a couple of meetings, but they didn't really know. They had 60 masters rowers, and they only had 20 junior or club rowers. And the masters didn't have a huge background in rowing, so some people started quite late. Mm-hmm. And, when I asked them what was the priority, well, they couldn't actually tell me. And, so it was difficult. They didn't have a lot of money. The senior group wasn't contributing a huge amount, either in expertise or finances. And so everybody was just using the club to go and row. So you lack that, club spirit and culture that comes from people contributing either the knowledge that they have or, something from their profession, whether they could be involved on the building committee or the finance committee, or they're the treasurer or fulfilling some other role. So, I think it is very, very much about establishing a clear guideline right from the very beginning.
What I'll do after this is put a link to two things. One is we've written a blog post about how to write a club strategy, And secondly, Duncan Holland wrote one recently called "What Shape Is Your Club?" because he was finding the exact same thing that you found, Tim, was that clubs were top heavy in the pyramid of membership with masters rowers, bottom heavy in the pyramid of membership with juniors, and then a lack of club competitive athletes aged, from 19 through to sort of 30. And that people might find that interesting in terms of being able to see that they're not alone and what are the things they could do if they find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, well, okay, we don't want to turn this into
No.
sort of critiquing every category. The masters, though, they can be a bit maligned in some, depending on who you talk to. It's great, firstly, to see people as you get older, still be active, still compete. Secondly, though, they can be, really the driving force in clubs. Now, that can be for good or bad. It can be for self-interest, or it can be for the betterment of the club. So a lot depends on, I think, meeting with that group and, calling on them to fulfil what has been a traditional function of masters. They're senior people, they can coach, they can lend their expertise, advice and their wisdom through their years of experience in all their fields. Historically and traditionally, they have been the coaches, the treasurers, the fundraisers, the social organisers, the general boat maintenance people, and they've been a real asset to clubs. Historically, that's been their function. There was no regattas for masters rowers. They were people that might have kept fit and rowed, but they didn't race essentially as a separate entity. So now they've been blended into regattas around the world. They're an asset if they want to be an asset. So, I think you have to weigh up the individual situation, but I always like to talk to that group and stress the importance of the role they play in the success of any club.
I agree, and certainly setting the club strategy enables the club then to articulate what its purpose is. Moving on then, our next question is again about club and club management. How would you suggest that those who run the clubs try to make the sport as financially accessible as possible to everybody who wants to get involved?
Well, I don't know if there's a surefire answer for that one. Unfortunately, it's a financially expensive sport. It's not getting a pair of swimmers and going to the pool. So for the club, the irony of that is that for the club to make it financially viable for others, it's going to have to be very financially viable itself. So, what you're essentially saying, if you want to make it financially viable, is that you're donating services, whether that be for equipment, for coaching, for opportunity, and people for showing video, for talking to people, for recruiting, etc. Those are all time-consuming activities, and it depends on the priority. If that's a priority of the club, is to increase membership by making it more viable financially, I think fine, they've got to set up strategies to do that. So masters and people who have the wherewithal to recruit, to coach, to support that financially, buy the equipment, etc. That's going to have to be a club initiative. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I think all clubs make it financially viable. There is no club that charges an appropriate fee, from my experience, and that's an unwritten law of clubs. That yes, it's $500 or $1,000 a year. You can't tell me that that's financially viable. $10 to $20 a week to row.
Yeah.
And yet, if you say it's $1,000 a year, people look at you like, "Oh my God, that's an outrageous fee." But it's not really in the scheme of things today. And so for me, paying $1,000 a year, that's still the club being financially kind, if you like, to all members. That's still not paying for the cost of people rowing in the club. I say to people, $10 a week barely pays for the showers, for the hot water. Mm. So, let alone the rates and all the running costs of clubs. So, there seems to be a bit of a gap in the thinking. There's a bit of a disconnect between what people get as a service and what they pay for, and they're quite happy to pay for in the world in all other areas. So, I think it is. I think the ones financially viable are the kids. So, running school programs or, getting younger ones involved. I think they're a group with genuine need. So, I think that's very, very much an individual assessment of what your vision of the club is.
I fully support that. One of the things that I've noticed with the rise in certain countries of lottery and charitable funding to support public sport is that the old school culture of the club having regular fundraising days, whatever that may be, whether it's a once a year sponsored row or running its own regatta or whatever, they have moved away from that toward a culture of filling out a form, holding out their hand and expecting a charity to write a cheque for them. And I think this is to the detriment of, firstly, club spirit, which you identified as being quite an important thing in the vibrancy and relevance of a club. But secondly, I think it means that if that source of funding dries up for whatever reason, it means that the club is then left with a group of people who lack the skills to self-organise and fundraise.
Yeah, true. Okay, some of these topics are never-ending, so...
They are. We do, again, self-publicity for Row Perfect. If anyone's interested in this, every quarter, every 3 months, we write a blog post with fundraising ideas. So anybody who is looking for ideas on how to raise money for their club, there are lots of suggestions out there. In fact, we've got a very outrageous one which we copied from an American boat club where one of the parents of the juniors was an actress in the TV show Glee and was prepared to give her services free of charge, which made them a lot of money. Before we just go on to the next question, we've got an observation again from John Hill saying that since the Olympics in the UK, the focus has shifted more towards a policy of inclusivity rather than competitiveness, which he believes has led to more social and rewarding experiences built around rowing rather than just a competitive environment.
Sure. I think if clubs are engaged and want to recruit more people, I think that goes without saying. Governments can only drive things so far, and the initiative needs to come from a little further down the train.
It does indeed. My experience certainly at Tideway Scholars was when we got the parents of the juniors in, we found that they were marvellous. They used to make the tea and bake the cakes and drive the trailers and be the safety launch drivers, and we found them to be a really useful part of the club, even though they had very little rowing experience until their kids started rowing. So our next question is an interesting one. Is there a career pathway for coaches who may not have rowed at the elite level themselves, and how do they get the chance then to prove themselves?
Yeah, there's a little bit in the question we answered before, Rebecca. How do you make your way in terms of a career path? I'm assuming that's a full-time coach. That's not actually all that easy. You need to start like we all started as volunteers at the club and make a contribution there, and at the same time be educating yourself, going out with other coaches who are better than you, and trying to be enthusiastic and innovative at your own club. So that means being the most organised coach there is at your club. That means having access to some technology that people can get feedback on their rowing, and being enthusiastic, and creating a good culture there. So they're the things that endear rowers to coaches. The coach showing that they care about the athletes and what they do. They're enthusiastic about their profession. And they're introducing things which the athlete finds beneficial. So the club committee and the general culture of that is the feedback for that coach. How do you get to prove yourself? Well, again, it's just results and the general feedback of the club. So if the coach wants to be a career coach, that's results driven, and you can get great results and get noticed by having great school crews, developing a reputation, as some schools do. And you can do that as a club, and certainly getting at the elite level is more of a nationally driven initiative. So, if you want to replace, Paul Thompson or Jürgen Grobler, you have to be quite good.
I absolutely understand that. I do think it's a misplaced view that a top rowing coach has to themselves have been a top athlete. I often hear people say things like, oh, I would love to be coached by, name your favourite Olympic gold medal winner. And I think that a lot of people think that because an athlete, a successful athlete, has been successful, they must therefore also have the ability to teach other people to do what they've done. In my view, teaching is a very different skill set, and the people who are excellent teachers are often people who are wired very differently from the mindset of the elite competitive athlete. And despite the rather nasty quip that those who can do and those who can't teach, I think that's completely misplaced, and the excellent teachers have a fantastic role and could follow the exact pathway that you've described, regardless of their own personal skill or otherwise in rowing. In fact, I think Jürgen Grobler wasn't himself a rower, is that right?
Again, what was that, sorry?
Was Jürgen Grobler an international athlete? I don't think he was.
No, but, he was part of a system, and, he did row, and, he's by far most outstanding coach we have in the sport. So, I think that's an example. I think it's different from when Jürgen started to now. I think so. There are more established systems around the world, and often if a club coach develops a person to win races, often they're usually passed on in a system to what is perceived as a better coach. So anyway, we'll move on from that. There are other issues with all that.
Someone's put Chris George has put a nice comment up. David Tanner, he says, the headmaster, he is a teacher. Absolutely right, Chris. I think that's a very fair observation. Moving on to talking about technique, thinking about the world and Olympic stage at the present time, which crews, either in rowing or sculling, do you think are technically the most advanced?
Technically the most advanced. Well, people usually look at the winning crews first, and they're outstanding athletes, so you have to be technically and physically really at the top of your game. I think the successful crews that won, that I think rowed well, they all did a great job, of course. The German quad was an impressive crew over the last cycle. The British four, the Australian four obviously were a good rowing crew this year. With Drew Gean and company, some new young fellas, Dunkley Smith, Chapman and Lockwood, so they also rowed very well. But I think the New Zealand, double, they were, small guys, very competitive. And when you say row well, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm and spirit and toughness, and I think that shows out with some crews more than others. The single scullers, Drysdale has been at the top. Cynic is close there. Campbell always fights very hard. So, I think, the model is, if you're looking at technical models, you see small people like the Danish double, as in comparison to people like Drysdale. They scull very differently, but they're great athletes. No matter how technically they look, they do one thing in common, and that is they don't interrupt the boat a lot. So they have a great efficiency in how they apply themselves, even though it's quite different, and they're quite different body types, and that sometimes initiates that difference in the technique that you see.
Go into a little more detail, would you, about the different body types? I guess you're thinking about the Danish lightweight double.
Well, if you go from the Danish lightweight double to Marty Drysdale, there's quite a difference in technique and application. So, you need both. You need the art of rowing is the application of the power. It's no good just having the power itself. You need to apply the power. So these people do it in the most efficient way, and they use themselves in the most efficient way for them. So I think that's educational rather than just having one model in your mind and being critical of some and complementary of others.
You yourself, in coaching some of your crews in the past, I'm sure have advanced different approaches as your expertise has matured over the years. Can you give us an example of where you've adapted the technique that you're coaching as a result of the particular skill or physical abilities of the crew?
Well, two different crews that I coached. The double from '92 from Barcelona was a small double compared to the field, or generally what's accepted heavyweights.
Is this Peter Anthony? Sorry, can you name the athletes?
Yeah, Steve Hawkins and Peter Anthony. They were great athletes. They had, great coaching and, background before I coached them. So they're, great individuals. And they were small, but I feel we used, their body type to the way they rode. They were quite smooth. They rode well, but they weren't tall people. Into the 90s and 2000 era, we had a four where the guys were 6'6". So it's the same comparison between the Danes and Drysdale, for example. One's a sculling crew, one's a sweep crew. One group is short, one group's tall. So, there are certain mechanics that are different with smaller and taller people. And the bulk of the people and the power of the people. So, you can make slight adjustments to maximise those body types, if you like.
Give us an example of the adjustments. You're talking rig here?
Well, if you've got really, really long legs, you've got to push them, and certainly can't get in the way. If you look at the Danish double, or even Hawkins and Anthony, they sort of, they use back and legs a little more concurrently, and so there's a bit more, legs and back in that, but the legs weren't the dominant. So like the Italians over the years have always been very sharp onto the legs. The Australians this year were likewise. So people, focus on certain areas. Sometimes that's because the trends or the winning crews have promoted a certain technique, and people like to emulate that. And that's quite understandable. So that would be a difference. I mean, words people have different interpretations. We often all use the same language, but you look at the different countries and the variations in technique, and we have quite significant differences. So that's just a small one. The length of their legs, shorter legs could perhaps engage a little more back and combination of legs and back, whilst others may be a little more leg driven if you've got quite long legs, for example.
So what was the second crew you had in mind that you said was you had to adapt the technique to match them?
What was that again, sorry?
You named two crews that you said you adapted the technique. One was the 92 double. What was the other one? I was just saying
about the four from the UTS4 that rode for Australia after the Awesome Foursome. So in the late 90s, 2000, there's silver medal, bronze medal crew. They were all 6'6", and tall, leaner guys. Hawkins and Anthony were, they'll tell me they were close to 6 foot, but yeah, they were a little shorter. So I'm just saying, for this year's example, I mean, the Danish lightweight double, if you look at some of that video and then have a look at Mahi Drysdale, and you get a different picture. So there are adaptations you can make. People generally look at the crews that are winning, and that's generally recognised as a successful model, if you like, no matter how they do it.
As a coach, let's say you recognise some of these variations and you want to try something different. How do you find out and test whether your ideas are working in practice in boat speed?
Just to repeat that last part, how do you
find out in practice in terms of boat speed whether your ideas are working?
Well, that's I don't think a lot of coaches, they have a model and they'll work around the edges of that model. How do you find out? You just measure it on the clock, I suppose, is the most common way. You get feedback from the athletes, you take video, you take heart rate. You've got to work out the cost, the physical cost of applying yourself in a certain way. if it's quite expensive in terms of efficiency, well, that's going to cost you as well. So, combination, it's your eye, it's feedback from the athletes, it's the picture that you're looking at during and after the session, it's the physiological cost for the effort. So I think if you can combine those, you're doing very well.
Optimising and balancing all the elements, what a skill. Moving on then to the next question. What do you think is largely responsible for boat speed generation at club level? Is it technique or is it physiology?
Well, it's simply the application of the people's power. The sport is rowing. The people who want to get to the next level, they do present themselves, and they have to have. It's a physical game. It's a difficult sport. You have to be, tough and physically strong, and then you have to apply that power in a mechanically efficient way. So, for a club, I think the obligation is to teach people how to row. You train them and try and use best practice to train them, whether it's erg training or running or calisthenic circuits. They're all very good things for training, but they're also good things for group culture. Running a regular circuit at the club each week, playing other team activities which help develop culture. You might play, might be a touch football game once a week. The guys may be swimming. You may do a boxing circuit. You may do dumbbell circuits. You may have a run around a certain fixed track around the geography of your club. They're all things which help develop club culture and club spirit. So, so I think that's a combination of those things.
Certainly, in my experience in clubs, that the main thing that at the lower levels produces winning crews is usually fitness. And I have vivid memories of exactly what you just described. We had a commando circuit in the gym. We had a club run around a fixed distance, which was timed. And as you say, competing against each other on a regular basis certainly helped when we then got to the close races. I've got a question here from Pam, who is in Invercargill in New Zealand. She said, what's the best way for a taller rower to adapt their stroke when they have to row with shorter people?
That is a good question. It's a good question. Usually you have to be a little bit more creative with the rig, perhaps, a wider span. So actually getting the angles right is a challenge. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is, if you're using, if it's sculling, okay, I think it's more difficult because certainly the tall people can really get out to extreme lengths. But again, that's the coach's task, is to try and perhaps have the posture of the taller person a little bit stronger position so they're not overreaching, and the shorter person's going to have to turn themselves inside out. But that's often the situation you're left with. Sometimes it's better to have the taller person and the stronger person stroking, and then the shorter person can try and extend themselves and feel the pattern of the main person in the crew, if that's the right way of saying that. So both rigging and technique, shorter following the taller, and try and get the blend of techniques as close as you can.
That's great, Pam. I hope that gives you something to go back to work on.
Not really a satisfactory answer, but it's I think between the technique and the coach, you do have to make some adjustments. I generally put the taller person in the stroke, and say if it's a double, for example, the stronger, bigger person often feels like they're rowing with no one if they have a smaller, lighter person. And you often see some good doubles have these smaller bowmen, smaller, stronger power weight bowmen, and the stronger, bigger person in the stroke seat.
Certainly in the big eights that we see at the international regattas, you'll often find in the middle of the boat there's a man particularly with very, very long legs, and observing them you see that they don't row all the way forwards to their shins going vertical, presumably because otherwise the arc of their blade would be out of kilter with the other 7 people in the crew.
Yeah, so you'll see some big crews who row about 7/8 or 9/10 slide apparently, but they're the sort of adjustments that you can make, quite subtle without compromising the leverage.
When you're looking at different athletes of different physiologies, Carlos is asking a question: which do you prefer more of? Do you like wingspan, which is the fingertip to fingertip measurement, or athletes' actual body height?
Yeah, well, I think there's been a trend in the last, I suppose 20 years, but in the last decade there's certainly been a greater prevalence. The people that we're trying to attract to the sport, they're trying to get taller, physically more imposing people into the game. That was initiated, in Eastern Europe initially, and running talent identification squads. I think arm span and breadth of shoulders is one measure. When you're just measuring height, longer legs, looking at the ratio between the thigh and the shin, dictates how close you can get the seat to the heels. So if you have really long thighs, for example, that can be difficult for the mechanics of the body. It makes the leg drive a little shorter, because the actual length of your leg also takes up a lot of space in the boat. So, when you can't just talk about height, you talk about the ratio between the thigh and the shin. So to get optimal in the length, some people have got long legs and a short back. And all these things you can adjust to with some rigging and some experimentation, if you like. But I think ideally, you coach what you're presented with. Tall people turn up. You sort of figure that stuff out. You don't discount people because of their size. They prove themselves through all the normal ways, through their erg, through their training, through their attitude, through their competitiveness on the water. So I think height it's a starting point, and nothing more than that.
In terms of sweep and sculling, is there any difference in wingspan for one discipline rather than the other?
I think what's generally accepted is that shorter people can do well in sculling. Sometimes they're discounted in sweep rowing, but not always. I mean, the Greek Gianni Postavoni ran the Greek program this last couple of cycles, and they've had smaller people, but he's done a great job. They've had good crews, and they row well, and they've been very quick. So in both sweep and sculling. So, but predominantly, I suppose the shorter people do gravitate to the sculling. They feel that they can get a better result there.
That's interesting. Moving on now, we've had a question in about
coaches might direct people. I should say coaches might direct shorter people to sculling, and the results come later. But it's not impossible either way. But that's a generally accepted sort of premise, if you like.
Good. We've had a question come in about 2K testing, which obviously is one of the bedrocks of selection around the world. Has using the Concept 2 ergon sliders affected Australia's on-water performance in the past Olympics? There's discussion that their crews lost power at the catch in the Olympic finals and underperformed as a result.
Well, I haven't heard that discussion. Lost power at the catch. Look, I think the Australians, and I've been outside the system for some years now, but as an observer, they did very well in 2011. They won the quad, won the lightweight 4, and the 8 was got a few a few dirty strokes at the end to finish fourth in the 8. They had some medals right across the board. The women did well. So, it was a hugely successful year for them. And they were right up there with the leading countries. So, many things happen in an Olympic year. First, second, third, the World Cup winners in the men's double, the Norwegians, won the B final a month later. The Australians in the men's double, came 8th. The Germans, who'd been winning, came 9th. Some of the crews, have injuries. Some of the crews are either under or overtrained. Sometimes the technique, the mental and psychological side of it is a huge factor there, the expectation of the athletes. So, I wouldn't say that the sliders had a lot to do with it as an observer. And on the slides, the catch is usually, it's certainly when you kick it with the legs, you get pretty good response on the sliders. So I would be thinking it might promote certainly that sharp leg drive that they seem to have, moved towards a little more, if I could say that. But, their performances, and again, I think they won 5 medals. I don't know if it's a poor performance. So I think you've got to be careful to categorise a team when it's individual crews. There's 14 events, okay. Maybe 3 or 4 of the crews may have not performed as well as they could have, or for a variety of reasons, and they were carrying injuries or form, a drop off in form psychologically. There's many issues there, but I don't know if the sliders were a contributor. That would be my assessment from the outside.
That's great.
I think they are changing actually back to fixed in some areas as well. So, that's an ongoing debate. The usefulness of sliders, road perfects, fixed ergs. I think they're a teaching aid. They're obviously a testing aid for elite crews, and the fixed 2,000 metre test has been the standard, and I'm imagining that it will continue to be so.
I personally don't see any reason to stop, being as that's the racing distance. But then, hey, who knows? When I started rowing, for some reason we were tested on 2,500 metres, but it was all a little different in those days. I've got another 2K test question sent in by an athlete in Cambridge in the UK who said, what's the best method to deal with underperformance on 2K tests? I do well in my performances in other standard tests, such as a 30-minute erg at rate 20, 5K, 3 times 6K, etc.
So you're looking at your training methods to improve that?
Correct.
And so if they do well in the long and not so well in the short, without knowing all the specifics, sometimes it's poor planning. People don't have a good plan. They don't set realistic goals. They might have done 6:20 as their best, and they're trying to set a target of 6:10, so they take off at in the low 130s and end up blowing up. So there's those scenarios. If you discount that and you're just talking about training, you can certainly do shorter pieces, or often do blocks of 500 and 1,000 metre pieces, and try and hold the fixed rate and try and hold a fixed score. So you can do it 2 ways, whether you either blast and do a lot more intense work, or you can do that on target speed plus a margin. I wouldn't discount the longer pieces. You could do something shorter. For example, you could do, multiples of, say, 6 minutes. So you might do, instead of doing 6-minute work, you might do 12 minutes. Say 3, 2, 1 minute, 3, 2, 1, 3. So you can do 3, 2, 1 twice. And the 3 minutes might be at, say, your target score, or your best score. Say it's a 6-minute erg and your best is 130. So you could do 130 for the 1 minute, you could do say, +6 to 8 for the 2 minutes, and you could do, say, +12 for the 3 minutes.
So that's 12 seconds and
Yes.
6 seconds.
So in other words, and you can figure that out. It might be +12, it might be +14. It depends how intense with your training and your coach, how intense they want to make these practices. Obviously, the smaller margin, the tougher it gets. But if you're doing a 12 to 18 minute piece, like a longer piece, you can do that sort of theory, if you know what I mean, and manipulate the number to something that's sustainable. A hard workout, which is upper end of the threshold transport type work, and it goes for an extended distance. So, it might be that 1 minute at 1:30, but the 2 minutes could be at 1:40, and the 3 minutes could be at 1:48. So it's +10 and +18, and you can start off at a baseline and work your way down. But doing that for 12 minutes, doing that twice, is a little harder than it sounds, and doing it for 18 minutes is again quite solid. So they're just variations of the theme. I think you can do the interval work with, you can do sets of 500s with if you just want speed with a longer break, if you want some lactate tolerance with shorter breaks. But I wouldn't be doing those pieces all the time. They've got to blend in with the longer work and, with the structure of the program.
Thanks very much. Now we've got a question which is about body resistance circuits. A reader wrote in and said, where do I find advice and details about body resistance circuits?
Where do you find advice and details? A lot of the coach education booklets have examples of, weight type exercises and routines. I know Tor Nielsen and the FISA coaching manuals have outlines of a circuit in there, if you can get a copy of those. Alternatively, I think more experienced coaches often have these types of circuits, and you can structure them accordingly. Some legs, back, pulling and pushing exercises, jumping exercises, stomach and core exercises blended in a station type routine. I can forward you after the meeting if there are people that want or really have struggled with resources. I'm happy to follow up. It's not a massive group, I don't think. So we can talk about that further. But I think in the coaching manuals you'll find, Rebecca, there's some examples, and if there's not, I can send you some.
Fabulous. Right, I'm going to open it up to questions from our attendees, and the first one that's come through in anticipation is from Ken Davey. And Ken is asking, what are the key areas to focus on when you want to avoid slowing the boat down? Are there any specific techniques which you can employ?
Well, it is a good focus point. I think, Ken, you bounce between the visual of what you look, the legs, back and arms, the sequence of the drive, how smooth and even the slide is, and of course what the impact of all that is on the boat. Now there's more data than we know what to do with these days attached to these boats. But when you're racing, people need a good feel for this at speed. Things that promote, I think, good feel for the boat. Feet out work makes people be a little more careful. Once upon a time, when they were just plastic heel cups, if you didn't do that well, you fell in fairly readily. Other drills, very low rating work. So you can move between 12, 14, 16, 18, so you can vary that. Varied pressure work from light pressure to half to 3/4 to full. I think Rusty Robertson used to do a lot of catch exercises, they were called. So sitting around where you tap at the finish, roll forward and place at the front and sit there for 1 or 2 seconds or 3 seconds and check yourself and adjust any positions. If I had to say, is there one thing, that would be it. That catch exercise is, I think, a very good exercise for, you know, control, and you can do them in sixes or fours, or with some kids balancing the boat, and just getting the concept so they can practice tapping and feathering, getting set up, rolling forward, timing the seat and the entry. So looking at the roll of the wheels and the placement of the blade. So, you know, I think catch exercises, if you have the time, or you should make the time, you know, in a quiet place, to make that a section of your training. If you've got 60 minutes, you know, I would certainly spend 10 or 15 minutes doing those if I had a young crew. So, you know, and the other variety, the variations in rates and pressures and slides, and, you know, those are things that you can incorporate into your steady state paddling. And you can do your one firm and one light and two on, two off and three on, and just some stroke play, which in effect teaches them the building nature of the rhythm in the boat, and effectively practicing your starts in some fashion, moving the boat from a slow to a higher speed and then back down and back up and back down. So I think being a little creative and having some variety with the practice, and being persistent with these things, and stressing the importance of them, you know, I think should occupy a part of the practice, particularly for young, for school and club people.
Tim, would you choose to measure the success of those drills using something like distance moved per stroke?
Well, you know, coach, you know, there are some things, you know, you just don't want to measure. The people will say that felt better and that was good. And you've got data, so you can measure speed, and you can do, I think each week at the club, or, you know, it's good to do a speed day, regardless of your philosophy of training program. It's good to do these pieces. It might be this long section one day, it might be some, you know, 1,000 or some 500s or 250s, or a combination of racing type work where you get some feedback. It depends on your regatta schedule. If they're racing all the time, I do less of that, of course. If they've got weekend regattas, you can do other development work on distance and, you know, lower rates between, you know, 14 and 30 type work. So you do longer pieces, but rates normally between 20 and 28, say, for example, if you've got racing each weekend. And you can do your starts and some shorter pieces to practice that sort of execution at speed. So it's a blend of that, depending on the ability of the people, your number of sessions they're training, and you know, and what the weekend racing schedule is like.
Fantastic. Any other chat questions coming through from the attendees in the chat at the moment? There's a quick one from Ben, quick moving. When coaching novice first-year rowers, would you try to keep them fresh during the water sessions and work on improving fitness in land training so that technique in the boat doesn't deteriorate? And that's from Ben Rodford.
Ben, yeah, it's always going to deteriorate if they're novices. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. You know, certainly have your land circuits, those little dumbbell circuits we talked about, or the boxing or the running or the touch football, you know, activities to keep a little bit of fitness. Because as novices, the main thing is to teach them rowing. And you'll do a lot of work in pairs or fours, depending on the boat you're in, of course, singles if you're sculling, in doubles and quads. But, you know, at the same time, they're sorts of good drills, those ones I just mentioned, you know, the light pressure, the half pressure, the three-quarter pressure, the one-stroke firm, and one off and two. So they're counting, and you're teaching a little concentration inadvertently. And you're sort of running them through a variety of the skills. And you can do a couple of building tens to see what sort of rate they can get up to. You can say, okay, we want to crack 30 or 40 or 50. And they'll sort of flail away at that, and you know, but they'll get better. But you're introducing them to starts to a little higher speed work with short numbers, and you're doing your catch exercises, your placement drills, you're doing your one on, one off, two on, two, and so on. So you've got a little bit of a plan and a structure. to the practice, and then you're taking them down to really, really low rating. A good exercise for that is just counting, like hands away, and then count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 place on the way forward. So that really stretches their ability. But it's good to practice these things in pairs as well as a four, and it's good that they're short numbers and drills, because then people aren't sitting around too long. So you have to weigh up the climate you're in. If you're in England, or February in England is often a little bit unfriendly, but you can teach these things on the erg and with the mirrors, and go through routines on land in a rowing sense. Do your pauses and that, and try and then repeat practice of those drills on the water.
Ben's just followed up with an additional supplemental question. And is there any value in that for more experienced rowers?
Oh yeah, I think you're just going to get better quality. But yeah, there's certainly value in that for experienced rowers. I think you want to always be trying to improve your coordination at the front, the back, the skills with the blade, and the management of your body weight as opposed to the boat. So those drills that we spoke of, the feet out work and the pause work and the low rate work and the very pressure work and those sorts of things, yeah, I think so. And when people are tired, at the higher level, people will often be in a state of fatigue, and some of these things can help keep that efficiency that they need at the top level.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Tim. We had a question which has come through a couple of times, which someone asking, are there any breathing or other exercises to help manage asthma while rowing?
Any breathing or other exercises? I suppose you'd have to, that's a bit of an area on its own. In Australia, particularly, kids with asthma are encouraged to swim. But controlled breathing, I think there's a Butenko method that I've heard of, and it'd be wise to see some specialists on that. The thing with swimming, I think some people seem to think that even the chlorine, though, can bring on asthma rather than prevent it. So, I'd talk to a little more specialised advice in that area. Some kids do grow out of it, of course, and they have asthma as youngsters, but they improve their breathing and as they get older. But I think specific exercises, I'd talk to someone who's a bit more of an expert in the field. But I have had some people that do have this, exercise-induced asthma, and they've done some of these breathing courses. Butenko was one, I recall. It was a little more in the 90s, so... so chase that up. But if you have got people with medical issues, I'd make sure that you've got more professional advice and encourage them to follow that up.
Great. We're now on to probably the last question from Chris George in London. He has a novice squad doing 4 weekend and 1 midweek session of around 90 minutes each. He asks, what percentage of these hours should be technical in the main? He says, I do understand some work does need to be done.
Yeah, of course. That again was, he does it on the weekend and once...
4 sessions at the weekend and 1 midweek, yes.
You do 4 on the weekend.
Yeah.
So he takes up their weekends with rowing. That's good. Look, I think you've got to spend, Chris, amount of time which you think is going to be productive. There's a decay on all of this, so that if you just did catch exercises for 60 minutes, it could be productive. It depends on the engagement of the people and how much fun you want to make the practice. So I think if you're doing 90 minutes, I certainly think that you can do a third of that in drilling and exercise type work that we've talked about. But even in the steady state and other pieces that you want to do, Chris, there's opportunity to add square blade and change the rate and change the pressure and still get technical development. So they're not separate, their focus areas, and it's quite a pressure at times. But I think the technical element is always stressed when the work is on, and people have to be thinking or trying to feel these things under pressure when their brain is a bit foggy from the intensity. So I think I'd certainly spend that half hour, religiously and try and do the things that are most productive. If you've got people falling away and falling out of the boat, you may need to put collars on the oars to stop that. You may need to do some feet out work to sit them up a little more at the finish. And they may need to see that on the mirror if you've got a rowing tank. It's good to go through those things in a stable environment. So in pairs, in a rowing tank. And then stress the similar sorts of phrases that once the pressure comes on and you start doing some step rate pieces or some racing pieces or some, mid-rate race, transport 30, 32, that sort of work as well. So I think efficiency, application of the skills is the big thing. So firstly, technical development, a little application at certain rates, a little overrating work, starts and finishes to have a bit of fun, but also to, force them in a way to adapt to that speed. And then they come back and do some lower rating work and you'll find skills will be a little tidier. So don't forget the other end of the spectrum, that overrate, that high rating work in short numbers where you're building speed, practicing your starts and, forcing their skill development, if you like to put it that way.
Fantastic. Tim, we've come up to the hour, but we've still got a couple more questions coming through. Are you comfortable to carry on?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, guys, here we go. Next one from John Hill again. He said, if a club squad's restricted to 6 or 8 sessions a week, which portion of the perfect programme would one concentrate on and which part would you leave out? And he assumes that the perfect programme is an Olympic training programme.
It's. I mean, every situation is going to be different. That's a good initial comment. But I suppose the parts that you're going to leave out are those parts which you don't feel are relevant. That's the coaching part of the equation. If they're club people, John, 6 to 8 sessions is still a pretty solid workload for club people. But you're going to decide, well, these guys they're high school kids, rather than row 8 times a week, we're going to put in a couple of circuits. I think you've got to look at their long-term development and say, where are we going with this group? And so you can see they'll be at their peak in the future at some point. So I think certainly get the rowing in. Water sometimes dictates, conditions might dictate that you've got to do indoor stuff. Have a plan. I think have plans, whether it's erg sessions, whether it's calisthenics and circuit work, whether it's tank work. So at least have some backups there. But I think if you're looking at their technical development, that's one thing. You have to figure out the balance there. But they need to get a little stronger. But you haven't got access to Olympic lifting, nor are you inclined to go down that road with injuries and expertise. So, bar circuits and body weight circuits, as the question there before was on that circuit type activity. So, I think they're all things that you have to work out. So,
John
it's
says
not a cop-out. It's just a fact. I look at the kids and I think, well, these guys really, we need to do, their upper bodies are quite poor. The women, for example, the boxing circuit is good. Some of the dumbbell circuits are good. So you're developing a little more upper body resilience and balance so that they're not always just sitting and rowing. So it's up to you to figure out what a good balance is. Certain nights they may be training quite later because for work. So you might say the most efficient thing to do tonight is to run and do a circuit, or do an erg. So it can be, you can get a good workout in a half an hour or 60 minutes. And it's time efficient. The erg is time efficient. Running is time efficient. If you've got your circuit set up, that too could get a good workout for your time allocation.
So that
John,
will
I think,
build the physiology.
Sit down and say, what's the strengths and weaknesses of this group? What do I think is a good plan? And that's encouraging for you because you feel in charge of that and you feel like, well, this is my judgment, based on, my experience and what I think they need and what races we'd like to target. So if that's of any help,
Good.
you probably already know that. So just reinforcing that, if you like.
Carlos has asked another question. He says, do you think coaches overcoach and don't let kids just feel the boat as novices?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to generalise and say that, but I think, we all know of cases where that is certainly the case. And I don't mean, Carlos, that just in terms of too much information, but sometimes even when we get one point across, it's best to sort of pick what area you want to talk about, make the phrase as short as possible, and then reinforce that area, and then let some transfer of information from short-term memory to long-term memory take place. The thing is that if we talk about, look, be a little quicker with the leg drive or push a little more with that inside leg, for example. And a good phrase to use after that instruction is, it's going to feel like perhaps you're shooting the slide, or it's going to feel like your legs are a little quicker. And so you've given him the instruction, you've anticipated to the athlete what it's going to feel like. And this is a key phrase. It will feel like X, it will feel like Y. So you have to anticipate if this guy has a normal, he's got these faults, but that's normal for him in inverted commas. I think the really four of the most important words in coaching are those. It will feel like. So you're getting on the same wavelength no matter what their learning style is when you say it's going to feel like this. Because that's the only feedback the athlete has in the boat, largely, if they're not looking at data. So I think in that way, and then you leave them to practice that. You have to keep quiet for a minute or so. It takes time for information to go from short-term to long-term memory. So you're trying to establish this, and that's enough. So I think there's overcoaching in the sense of not too much being told, but often it's just a lot of information too quickly. Push your legs, and 2 strokes later it says, keep an eye on those catches. And another 2 or 3 strokes later it's move the hands a little. There's not enough emphasis on one thing, and that's the main thing. So you might say, look, we want to set up a little bit, we want to hold the legs down, reach over. So you'll have to work around that sequence of things and work on that area only, and then follow on later. So, and you have to be quiet for a little, and you have to say it succinctly and shorten your phrase. So you'll say, James, you get their attention. Let's try and push the legs quicker, Push the legs a little quicker is the summary. Push the legs a little quicker. Inside leg drive, you might reinforce it. It's going to feel like you're shooting the slide a little. Be a little brighter off the catch. It's going to feel that things are a little sharper in the change of direction. So you'll say it will feel like this, that. And then a bit of reinforcement, and then you practice that for a while before you jump on to, the catch and the body swing and the head position and leaning out at the finish, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think as coaches, we can underestimate how difficult it is to absorb and retain information while we're exercising. I mean, try it sometime. Get a coach to come, get the athlete to come and start talking to you while you're doing an intense piece. It's painful. I mean, it's painful to listen to, So, you don't want that. You'd rather just row, get a tip, and then not have too much following from that one tip, because that dilutes the importance of what you're saying. That would be all I'd add to that, Carlos.
Well, Tim, thank you very much indeed. We've run out of time. We've not, I'm sure, run out of questions, but I'm going to call a break here. I personally have really enjoyed listening.
We can answer more questions if you like. I'm in no rush. I would say that if you have the details and people do want to follow up, I realise they're paid for this, so it's a little unusual, but I can, if there's other questions or resources, or if there's some other things I would like, certainly I'm happy to help further down the track.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, what I will do now is tell everybody that we have recorded this. I hope the recording will be successful, and we'll share that with you. So if you wish to share that around your colleagues on your coaching team or your club, please feel free. Secondly, we'll find links to all of the things that Tim has referenced in the talk so that you can get hold of them and use them for yourself. And thirdly, please send me any feedback you've got, good and bad. We want to make this as valuable as possible for you, particularly coaches, because we think there is a need for this, but we also think there's a great opportunity for, certainly in the English-speaking world, for us all to learn off each other, because fundamentally we're all here because we love it, but can we make it as enjoyable as we possibly can for ourselves and our athletes? And I hope that this will be an active part of your own enjoyment going forwards.
Good. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. Rowing chats can be a little boring at times. I realise that. So hopefully there's been some information that's been useful.
Tim, thank you.
All the best. Bye now.
Bye-bye.